Woman Yvette D. Clark, and I proudly represent you in New York's Ninth Congressional District, that's Central and South Brooklyn. Centered in our responsibilities as members of Congress is service to the people, our communities, and our best interests. That's why I will not vote for the infrastructure bill without a vote on the reconciliation bill. Let me say that again. I will not vote for the infrastructure bill without a vote on the reconciliation bill. I want you to know I stand with the progressives in Congress as a progressive myself and others in insisting that we need the Senate to deliver America's human infrastructure before we can pass the bipartisan infrastructure net framework. Let me remind you, President Biden ran for the soul of this nation. He ran and won on that very same promise we are trying to keep today. Lowering prescription drug prices, reducing healthcare costs, and a energy economy that addresses the climate crisis and environmental injustice, fixing a broken immigration system, and rolling back the Trump tax cuts that only benefit the well off and the well positioned. And so the legislation we pass must reflect the promises that we make. We must clarify our position. So let me clarify mine and some of the deliberations happening behind the scenes. With President Biden's Buildback Better agenda, we were presented with the unique opportunity to secure generational and intergenerational progress for millions of Americans and make good on our commitments to our constituents. Meaningful strides in overcoming climate change, delivering necessary care for our children, our health, and diminishing poverty for the underprivileged and underrepresented groups among us, and many other transformative investments are within America's grasp by enacting the Build Back Better agenda. Do you know that much of the Build Back Better agenda can be in the two bills garnering attention today? The hard infrastructure bill, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the Build Back Better Act, commonly called the Reconciliation Bill. Like twin sisters, these two bills have a fated destiny. Despite Build Back Better's support from upwards of 96% of the Democratic caucus and its overwhelming popularity among the American people, the tragic, disheartening reality is a handful, I say a handful, of Congress's malcontents would prefer to serve special interests and line their own pockets rather than embody the spirit of deliverance to finally help raise up the long struggling people who elected them. We progressives were asked insistently to compromise, to show faith in those who offered none in return, to meet them in the middle. We have repeatedly done so, yet rather than reciprocate with good faith, they only continue to backpedal and redefine where the middle lies. The Build Back Better Act is a product of the reconciliation process. It's our best option to maneuver around Republican obstruction. The priorities of the Progressive Caucus are no different than the priorities we have right here in Brooklyn. Strengthening the care economy with child care, paid family leave, and in home and community based health care. Investing in affordable housing, expanding Medicare to lower prescription drug prices and to include vision, dental, and hearing benefits. Meaningfully tackling the climate crisis with support for frontline communities and clean energy and promise to pursue necessary immigration reform. Yes, we're fighting for these causes right here in Brooklyn, too. And the impact of COVID-19 is still being felt here. The Ninth Congressional District is still recovering from the ongoing trauma of this devastating virus. Families are still hurting. For generations, the healthcare crisis devastating our district has only been exacerbated through critical underinvestment in services and support. Here in Brooklyn, we consider ourselves to be a reflection of the world, a diverse people, rich in culture. Humane immigration policies and a path to citizenship are major priorities for us. But let me tell you something. While these are my priorities for Brooklyn, they are not universally supported by other Democrats. That's why we build consensus, especially when delivering transformative policies like the Build Back Better agenda promises to do. So enough is enough. I'm a hard no on the infrastructure bill without a vote on the reconciliation package. Both of these packages are needed to move forward and build back better for the American people. We have an opportunity to bring substantive change to this nation, and I intend to hold up my end of the deal. So you can stay updated on my legislative efforts by following me on social media and signing up for my newsletter. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, stay strong, and if you haven't already, get vaccinated. Now we'll move on to questions that have been submitted by the audience. And thank you to those who sent questions and comments as part of your RSVP. We received hundreds of queries and are so grateful to see the community engaged on these important issues. While we won't get to every question submitted, we will work to touch on each of the topics that came up repeatedly. And while I will answer each question to the best of my ability, it is important to remember that on the larger of the two pieces of legislation that make up the Build Back Better agenda, the reconciliation bill, also known as the Build Back Better Act, is not yet finished. So there remains some uncertainty on key provisions. My staff has taken the liberty of compiling the questions, and we will start with education. Many of you have asked how the Build Back Better agenda will lift up the students of Brooklyn and improve our schools. Firstly, Democrats always stress the importance of a strong education, particularly early childhood education. And while a number of proposed provisions are currently up for debate as our Big Tent party works towards consensus, one area of agreement is on the importance of guaranteeing access to voluntary free preschool programs for all 3 and 4-year-olds to make sure our kids are getting off to the best start possible in life. We've been experiencing this in New York City, and what a difference it has made for so many of our families. In terms of the physical locations of schools, one provision we are fighting for is the tax credit provision that is designed to specifically be used to rehabilitate public school buildings in need of repair and improvement. As students continue on their educational journey, Democrats are also fighting to lower the cost of higher education by increasing the maximum Pell Grant award by $1,500 and investing in subsidized tuition at historically Black colleges and minority-serving institutions. Another reoccurring theme among the questions received, well, I'm in Washington, so you may hear some bells go off. I'm going to just let that pass. Very well. Day's over here in Washington, D.C. But another recurring theme among the questions received was provisions related to childcare. Despite the infighting among Democrats, often portrayed by the media, and the ensuing well-founded concerns among you voiced in your comments, there remains a general consensus around the importance of lowering the burdensome cost of childcare for lower and middle income families. Following President Biden's lead, congressional Democrats came together earlier this year to address the lagging pandemic recovery left to us by former president and passed the American Rescue Plan, which established the child tax credit. This has proven life-changing for families across the nation and led to nearly 50% reduction in the rate of childhood poverty as eligible families begin receiving automatic monthly payments of $250 or $300 per child. If you've paid taxes and are eligible, you receive this monthly deposit without having to take any action. For non-tax filers, there's a sign-up tool to make sure you receive this money. The deadline for non-filers to sign up is November 15th. I'll repeat that. The sign up for non-filers, the deadline for that sign up is November 15th. Well, despite the calls of Republicans and even some moderate Democrats, I stand at the ready alongside my colleagues in the Progressive Caucus, ready to defend this transformative policy. In addition to the family-focused provisions of the agenda, many of you have also asked some version of what is the status of key provisions addressing climate change and the environment in the Buildback Better Act. Well, as proposed, the Buildback Better Act makes many critical investments in addressing climate change and improving our environment, from creating a civilian climate corps and funding resilient infrastructure projects to fully and completely removing lead from our drinking water and supporting publicly accessible electric vehicle charging stations. To be clear, as we sit here this evening, the climate-centric provisions are at risk of elimination if some of the more moderate members of the party get their way. But let me say that no matter what, we need a Build Back Better Act that comprehensively and equitably addresses climate change and allows us to cut our greenhouse gas emissions in half by the end of this decade. This is not just the fight of our lives, but the fight of our children and grandchildren's lives. And we will not go quietly and bend to the will of fossil fuel industry interests. Relatedly, another question we received was with respect to the inclusion of carbon pricing. The version of the Build Back Better Act that we marked up in the House included what was referred to as a clean electricity performance program, which would incentivize electric utilities across the nation to cut 80% to get to 80% clean energy by the year 2030. Let me repeat that. The Clean Electricity Performance Program would incentivize electric utilities across the nation to get to 80% clean energy by the year 2030. Now, of course, we have all heard the reports that a certain figure in the Senate does not support this program. But we are working with our colleagues in the Senate and the administration to find another approach that will tackle carbon emissions from the energy sector. And I'm confident that we will find a pathway forward to achieve our goals. It's imperative that we do. We have no time to waste. On this same topic, many have asked about what kind of green jobs will be implemented to combat climate change. Well, the Build Back Better Act will help spur the creation of millions of green jobs in communities all across this nation. This will, of course, include many new jobs in the energy sector, such as jobs working in wind turbine manufacturing right here in Brooklyn, and energy efficiency programs. But there will be also countless green jobs created to combat climate change that aren't directly in the energy sector. For example, the Build Back Better Act will advance a civilian climate corps that creates millions of jobs for young people, similar in theory to the Peace Corps, where folks recently out of high school and college will be put to work helping to make our communities and infrastructure more resilient to the impacts of climate change. How will these bills impact our quality of life in areas of clean water supply, you ask? Together, both the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better Act make a truly transformative investment in our nation's clean water with $45 billion to update our aging water infrastructure and remove toxic lead pipes from our drinking water supply. This issue is very important to me. Too many of our kids in Brooklyn and across this nation are exposed to lead in their school drinking water, which is why I fought to get funding into these bills to create filtered drinking water stations at schools and daycare programs so that our children can start drinking clean water right away as we simultaneously work to remove lead from our pipes and plumbing fixtures. On the transit portion of the agenda, another question received asked, how will this bill improve transportation infrastructure in Brooklyn? Well, our transportation system in the city of New York is in desperate need of a transformation, and we all know this. Combined, these two bills will help make the bold investments that bring our infrastructure into the 21st century. This includes billions of dollars in funding to bolster public transportation and help make the subways more resilient to the impacts of climate change and extreme weather that we saw most recently with Hurricane Ida. It also includes billions of dollars of funding to convert our dirty school buses and MTA buses to electric, which will have immediate air pollution benefits for our communities where asthma rates have become out of control. On top of all of this, the transportation funding in these two bills can be used to modernize our roads and our bridges and to help make our infrastructure smarter with things like smart traffic sensors that can help reduce traffic and make our streets a lot safer. Additionally, we all know that part of what makes Brooklyn, the Ninth District of New York, and our nation more broadly so special is the diversity of culture brought here by the many immigrants that come to our community in search of the American dream and in search of opportunity. And I know many are interested in hearing about the status of including transformative immigration reform in the reconciliation bill. Unfortunately, as you may know, the Senate parliamentarian rejected two proposals that we presented, including immigration reform, as they did not believe this legislation was the right vehicle for this. I am part of the Immigration Closers Group, a group that has been put in place by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, which was created to lead the charge on immigration reform in Congress, and we are fighting hard to ensure that this legislation includes and addresses the dire reform our broken immigration system needs. At this point, we are assessing our next options to present a proposal that the parliamentarian cannot refuse and will not reject. Switching gears, Brooklynites have also asked about the kind of public health services the Build Back Better Act may provide and how the efforts will improve the healthcare system and health equity. If there's one thing that we all experience together, it's the inequity and the shortcoming of the lack of investment in our public health infrastructure. And we paid a price, a very dear price for that. The Build Back Better Act improves the healthcare system in many ways. It would improve maternal health outcomes for vulnerable populations by ensuring that all pregnant women on Medicaid will keep their health insurance for the critical first year postpartum, while also making significant public health investments to reduce inequities in maternal health outcomes and strengthen the maternal health workforce. This bill also invests in our public health infrastructure and workforce by funding more than $36 billion in investments to rebuild and modernize public health departments, to support the construction and modernization of healthcare facilities, including hospitals, community health centers, behavioral health centers, and schools of medicine and nursing, and to expand capacity for training the next generation of primary healthcare providers. Further, this legislation builds on the American Rescue Plan and provides more than $15 billion in targeted investments for pandemic preparedness so our nation will be able to address any future public health emergencies, including shoring up the strategic national stockpile, strengthening our supply chains, supporting domestic and global manufacturing of vaccines, bolstering biosecurity, and investing in therapeutics. And finally, many have wondered, how will small businesses and people of color benefit from this agenda? Well, President Biden ran on a platform of helping lift small businesses and communities of color. And this is what we in Congress have crafted with the Build Back Better agenda. We were focused on justice, fairness, and equity, and centering the most vulnerable in our communities in this legislation. Our legislation takes care to ensure that 40% of the investments we make go towards low income communities and communities of color, folks who have been most impacted by years of injustice, inequity, and underinvestment. So, in closing this evening, I'd like to thank all of you for joining me for this critical conversation. And let me thank my staff members who have worked day and day in and day out to make sure that we could present this information to you this evening. I thought it was very important that we kept you abreast of what is happening here in Washington, D.C. So much is being reported through the press, but I can reassure you that as your member of Congress, I will be vigilant and I will be bold in working towards the Build Back Better Act, as well as the investments we must make in our critical infrastructure. And you can stay updated on my legislative efforts by following me on social media and signing up for my newsletter. On my social media, you can find me at Rep Yvette Clarke, and my newsletter is at clark.house.gov/newsletter. So once again, let me just thank you for tuning in this evening. I look forward to seeing you back in Brooklyn. And in the meantime, please stay safe, stay strong, stay healthy, and stay blessed. Take good care, everyone.